Well, today I had the pleasure of debating Josh Klein of Free Thinking Ministries on this question, how Christians should view Trump so far. Klein said that he would give Trump a B or a B minus. I didn't explicitly say in the debate, but I would be inclined to give Trump something closer to an F. The debate was hosted by Brax Hunter of Trinity Radio, and I've linked it below. I'm going to just offer some quick thoughts now on the debate. First, as I say at the end of the debate itself, I very much enjoyed it. I enjoyed interacting with Josh and being hosted by Brex. I think they're great guys. Man, I really disagree with them in terms of politics and social issues, and that'll be pretty clear during the debate. That doesn't mean they're bad people, nor hopefully it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And I think that is so important. That's something I really wanted to hammer on in the debate. You can disagree with people, even about very important issues, but you can do so agreeably, and you don't have to think other people are bad just because they disagree with you. Now, believe it or not, talking about politics and socio-political, theological issues, the nexus interface between those different areas is not honestly one of my passions, but I feel like it's something I have to do and we have to do, particularly because I think we are in a very dangerous time in history. I believe Donald Trump is an autocrat at heart. I believe day by day he is seeking to dismantle democratic institutions in the United States. And that affects just not the United States, but the entire free world and indeed the entire world. So it's something that should concern all of us. So by keeping these issues in the spotlight and raising some of the deep issues I have with Donald Trump was a means of me to keep this in the spotlight. I mean, just to give you an example that I didn't talk about during the debate, but Trump has repeatedly, quote unquote, joked about having a third term. Now, of course, when you quote unquote joke about things like that, you're always doing something when you engage in quote unquote joking. Like if a husband is always making comments about how he's going to kill his wife, you could say, well, he's just joking. He's not really going to kill his wife. And maybe he isn't. But the fact that he engages in that repeated pattern of commentary under the aegis of joking, which grants him plausible deniability, you have to consider that there is something very serious to be concerned about behind that pattern of quote unquote joking. And so it is with Trump's repeated comments about continuing on in his presidency and having a third term. And just this week, so what's his name? Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was interviewed and he made comments about how they are planning on having a third term, on having Trump continue in office, even though that is prohibited by the 22nd Amendment, I believe it is. I'm not a constitutional expert of the United States, but my understanding is that the 22nd Amendment that limits, it gives term limits in the Constitution for presidents only to serve two terms. And Bannon talked about removing that and waiving it in the case of Trump so that he could continue to be president. And the fact that that kind of conversation is already being had in public, out in the public space now, is just an example of how they are trying to shift the nature of the conversation day by day. Trump's ongoing support for Putin, his ongoing support for Russia, his attempt to erode Ukraine and democratic institutions, repeatedly attacking democratic historic allies like Canada, calling Canada the nastiest nation to deal with, repeatedly attacking and being showing contempt toward Europe, toward Denmark, toward um, other democratic nations, Mexico, Panama, and so on. That should concern everybody. So by having this conversation, I wanted to keep those things in the spotlight. So let me know what you think about the debate. I thought it was an engaging debate. Josh, in his opening statement, he focused on Trump's campaign against DEI and against trans people in sports and some things that Josh thought were favorable with respect to Donald Trump's stance on abortion. And I just think I don't agree with his stuff on DEI, with the way that Trump is attacking DEI. I didn't talk about this, however, because I think you really have to choose the things that are most important and focus on those. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't think focusing on DEI and what Trump has been saying about it, how he misrepresents it, is most important. Those who are regular viewers of my channel will know that I recently talked about Trump's Department of Justice sending a threatening letter to Georgetown University, threatening to investigate them for their affirmation of DEI. Now, that is extraordinary and of great concern because what that is doing is eroding free thought and the free thought of institutions by suggesting they could be investigated by Trump's Department of Justice simply by affirming something that Department of Justice doesn't agree with. So that is concerning, but I didn't want to get into a debate on DEI as such. Now, Brax asked a really good question, and that is, well, is there something you would affirm? And honestly, I had thought about that question beforehand because, it's kind of like the question if you're having a job interview, then to be asked, what is your greatest weakness? If you're not prepared to answer that question honestly and fulsomely in a way that does show some degree of vulnerability and self-awareness while hopefully not tanking your job prospects, then that is very important to do because it does show self-awareness. And in this context, for me to be able to say something positive about Donald Trump's administration would be important for my own credibility. So I did concede that I didn't have a dispute with the way he had proposed, passed, signed, I think, what is the term? So I think it was executive order. I think he signed an executive order um, prohibiting institutions, leagues, etc., that receive government funding from having trans kids participate in the sports leagues. So you'd have to abdicate your funding, government supported funding, if you did that. And I was willing to concede, at least for the sake of argument, that I didn't dispute that or thought that that could be a favorable thing, because I do have my own concerns about trans athletes. But it was interesting that Josh said also he believed that trans people shouldn't be allowed to serve in the military, and I think that's utterly indefensible. So we talked about that a fair amount, but I did at least concede that much. There was something I could find in the Trump administration in the first 2 months that I would agree with. Um, but 99% of things I not only disagree with, but again, I think he's dangerous, harmful. Frankly, I think he's an evil person and he is seeking to erode democracy. So those were my quick thoughts. You can watch the debate below and comment below as well. Let me know what you think.